All right, everyone. We might have a reasonably unifying issue, actually, right here. Link in the description, archived, of course. Donald Trump renaming the Department of Defense to the Department of War. I rise in 100% support of this, and here's why. Linguistics are very important. Language, gestures, and symbols, other means of transferring some sort of idea or concept from one living thing to another, that's how we understand everything in the world around us. That's why different cultures have different cultural mores. They have different customs. They have different laws. They have different things that they would find unethical, ethical, maybe it's a gray area, stuff like that, good and evil. That's because of the way in which they use language. For example, certain primitive tribes don't have words for colors as we perceive them. They have two colors. They have wet and dry. If it's kind of shiny and watery, slimy, something like that, it would be wet. They would describe it as simply wet. If it's not, if it's, more drab, then it's dry. Those are their colors. They wouldn't understand what you said if you said, well, look at that bluebird. You mean that dry bird? What are you talking about? That's what they would think. War makes more sense than using the term defense in terms of this particular department. Because that's literally all that it's about. The only purpose of it is to conduct war and to advise on war and, supposedly to avoid war, but that rarely happens, I've noticed, unless a Trump happens to be in office. Uh, just saying, it is conspicuous that the first president not to start a major conflict in recent memory happens to be a Republican. But anyway, I just find that funny. Look back through political history. You'll find all sorts of weird gems. Politics makes more than just strange bedfellows in strange situations. It's just strange in general and filled with strange people for the most part. Using Department of War, though, is a good idea. This will make the population, I think, marginally more hesitant to endorse aggression when it's related to government operations. Because if you say, well, the Defense Department says, okay, so they're charged with defending the nation, right? No, they're charged with doing war. That's the whole point. Like, was it really defensive when we invaded Iraq? And hundreds of thousands of civilians, tens of thousands of U.S. troops died. We spent trillions of dollars and years of time to kind of sort of stabilize a nation that still is a thorn in our side today. Yeah, it's not as bad as it was during shock and awe when half of the infrastructure was completely leveled. It's stabilized to a degree, but it's only a matter of time before it pops off again. I'm warning. That will happen. Everyone knows that it's going to happen. It doesn't take a genius to predict that. It's the Middle East. Was that defense? No, it was war. It was a war of aggression too. Saddam had nothing to do with what Osama had been doing. In fact, he used to kill jihadists and thought it quite fun, actually. His sons were nuts. Probably they did it personally. They're like, oh yeah, grab me like 5 of these jihadis over here and I'm gonna whip them to death this time. I guess tomorrow maybe I'll use the boiling oil. I'm not sure yet. I'll have to wait and see. It depends on, how many concubines I can fuck in the morning. If it's an even number, we'll do the oil. If it's an odd number, I don't know. Maybe I'll put wires in their veins and then pull it through their whole body and just slice them into ribbons or something. I don't know. Kusei and Hude were a little bit weird. Anyway, Uday and Kusei, I think were their names. I believe. I can't remember which one was the more violent and insane one. They both kind of were, so it doesn't really matter. Now, Department of War is a much more fitting moniker, though, for it, because that's what it's for. And so when people say, well, read an article, let's say that war is potentially looming or a conflict is potentially looming with a foreign country. And the legacy media says, well, the Department of Defense says, the Department of Defense did this. That doesn't raise as many red flags as if you say, well, the Department of War is talking about this issue. The Department of War is really considering its options. It makes it sound more aggressive. It makes it sound more threatening. It makes it sound more potentially dire, more likely that there's going to be an armed conflict of some kind. The hope is that, therefore, unless it's for extravagant circumstances, the average American will say, no, 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 you don't need to be doing that. No, we don't need to go to war. Are you crazy? Why? What's the point? Whereas when you invoke defense, they'll say, well, it's not really a war. It's just a conflict. It's just an armed conflict. Technically speaking, a lot of the major wars we've been in over the last 50 years have been nothing more than conflicts for socio-political reasons. They're not, I mean, they're colloquially labeled war, and in some cases, war was actually duly declared. But in many cases, it wasn't. Like if you look at the invasions under Bush-Obama, a lot of those military strikes and so forth had nothing to do with an official declaration of war at all. Well, I mean, it should be. What should happen is you have a Department of War that helps to oversee and advise when you declare a goddamn war. Situational combat will always happen. Skirmishes will always happen. There will always be an ambush that you have to repel, or you've got some incredibly important reason why you have to march into that factory right now, and then you can sort out the diplomatic details later. This is pragmatism. This does happen. But when we're talking about large-scale conflicts, the likes of which would be, major front-page news, you should name it the Department of War, not of Defense, and make it clear to people if this department does get, considerably involved with what would otherwise maybe be a couple of skirmishes, you might be looking at a major war. And so you might be a little bit more hesitant to support the current government because you're like, yeah, we don't need another war. It's retarded. You may be less likely to encourage your kid to join the military at that particular time and say, well, it's might or might not be a good idea, kid. You want to get shot at? Yeah, because you can always take the rifle out back and take pot shots at you while you jog across the lawn if you're into that sort of thing. Uh, really, Department of War does make more sense, and that was the original name of the department anyway. They sanitized it and softened the language specifically to cover for the fact that it's still the War Department. It's not for defense. It's for killing people. Whether or not it's defensive means absolutely nothing, as we've seen over, multiple decades. We've seen it over and over again. It's not in defense of the population, or in many cases in defense of any foreign population. It's an aggressor. That is the whole point. Now, there's nothing wrong with hauling off and having a war if you really need to. I believe in a nation's right to defend itself against enemies. I prefer mostly a militia model, and the U.S. military mainly fielding the maritime and air capabilities more than anything else. And I think that private citizens should have an armory system with tanks and mortars and machine guns and all sorts of goodies. And I also don't believe in any other form of gun control, so I don't really care if you keep the fully loaded tank in your garage. That's fine as long as you make sure to keep it safe from blowing up or something like that or getting stolen by trendy Aragua, like the Democrats would want. They would rather trust a cartel member with a tank than trust me with a tank, I'm sure, nine-tenths of them, because they're crazy. Yeah, I think that this is a good change. I strongly agree with this. I rise in 100% support, Mr. Trump. It is a good idea to de-soften the language around war so that maybe it drives it home to a few more people. Hey, this is not a skirmish. It's not a conflict. No, it's escalated into a war. That's why this department is involved. That's about all. Peace out.